All eyes are on election results here in India, but there are a lot of countries that are also trying to monitor, see what's happening here. Exit polls have already suggested that the government of Bharatiya Janata Party and Prime Minister Modi is going to make a return for the third time. But how is the world reacting to it? We are being joined by Richard Rossow, who is chair in US India Policy Studies. He watches India very, very closely and has been monitoring not just elections, developments, and also bilateral ties between the two countries. Rick, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Let's begin with the fact that numbers are trickling in. We will be seeing a lot of excitement at the BJP headquarters for sure, given the exit polls. We do not really know where the numbers or how the numbers will end, but it does seem like it's a very confident Bharatiya Janata Party.
Yeah, and I'd say most of the world kind of shares that same confidence in that at least that they expect that the party for a long time now was going to have a relatively easy path to victory. So I don't think much of the world is going to be too terribly surprised once we see the final numbers, assuming that it all lands as we basically kind of expect and as exit polls had shown. So not any great surprises planned. I think people have kind of baked that in the cake, whether on the business side, on the security side, for a number of years now. Instead, it'll be more, what's the cabinet going to look like? Are there going to be some changes there? The upcoming budget? That's really going to become the new attention and focus, I think, from here on out.
All right, we will talk about the nitty-gritties and how you monitor the elections. But before that, US-India ties. Are we looking at continuum over here or a bit of change? We're certainly seeing a third term, or most probably a third term over here. But how does it look back home?
Yeah, I think overall you've seen good progress in terms of U.S.-India military cooperation. We're doing things on a regular basis that a lot of us wouldn't have considered possible 20 years ago. The complexity of our defense exercises, the fact that India has joined the regional maritime command that's based out of Bahrain. They're doing exercises in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. I mean, a lot of this stuff we wouldn't have imagined 25 years ago. On the commercial front, you've got some highs and some lows. I think both of our countries are in somewhat of a trade protectionist phase, and that causes some level of consternation. On foreign investment, the Modi government, I think, has done a lot of work trying to attract foreign investment. Some U.S. companies are stepping up, which is pretty notable. But overall, the numbers on foreign direct investment have really kind of plateaued and actually started to decline a bit in India, which goes against the grain, I think, when you see some of these announcements by large telecom suppliers and such making investments there. So I think there's a lot of issues that we still have to kind of resolve on the trade front. Some FDI liberalization we'd still like to see in India that would really open up the door for other foreign companies to come in. But the appetite's there. I mean, you look at the numbers, the fast growth rate, the population numbers, where by the end of the century, India will have double China's population. Companies are hungry and eager, and they just want to see a few more signals that the place is fully open for business.
Right. Now, in terms of elections, we've seen a lot of theories fly in the United States of America. You're also headed to an election, and it's going to be very interesting. But over here, also, we've seen a lot of theories fly. There is the opposition that is questioning a lot of the process itself. Uh, you have watched the process very closely. You've been monitoring the situation on the ground as well, even if it's from Washington, D.C. What's your assessment of how elections were held in India?
I've not heard anybody in a position of authority talking about concerns about, whether there's been meddling in dangerous ways. Some of the rhetoric on both sides makes us a little bit uncomfortable, whether they're talking about, caste or religion or things like that. So there's elements like that I would say raise some eyebrows now and again. But overall, I've not heard serious concerns about the way that the elections transpire, concerns about the security of the voting boxes and things like that. Something may come out, and of course, we all need to pay attention to that because a lot of us are under attack from forces around the world trying to impede the way our democracies function. I think the United States knows that as well as anyone, where you've seen constant Russian influence and meddling with the way that our elections are run. India certainly has its share of enemies in your neighborhood that may want to try to disrupt something, but so far, nothing I've heard that would call into question, I think, the results, nothing that I've seen on this side.
Okay, let's be honest, Rick, over here. You are always upbeat about India and ties with India. But in terms of a third term, did you see or did you expect these kind of numbers, even the ones that exit polls showed, crossing 350, close to 400? Are these the numbers that you would have imagined at all?
No, having been doing this for almost 30 years now, I still the majority of my time working with India, you've had coalition governments, right? So that always kind of feels like the norm to some extent, even after 10 years of single party majority. And you've actually seen in state elections, the BJP is actually down. They've not had, I mean, of course, with UP and some big ones, it feels like they're on the upswing, but they've lost the South, some northern states, so they've got I think it's 12 chief ministers right now, which is down from the total of 14, the high peak. So the regional parties in particular have shown, at least in state elections, the ability to push back and take territory back from the BJP. So yeah, we talk about leading up to the Lok Sabha election. Prime Minister Modi's getting older. The economy seems to be doing okay, but I've not seen credible third-party reports on jobs that show that job creation has really been as strong as the government claims it is. That's where I think, we've got some concerns still. But, if you've got public service delivery to the poor, if you've got strong messaging and a relatively weak opposition, it's a powerful mix, and it seems to be working out very well.
Well, in terms of how the states have thrown up results this year around, um, any surprises? Any state that really surprised you?
In the Lok Sabha election, or you mean state
Yes,
elections leading up to this?
Lok Sabha elections. This election, the general
The numbers
election.
that I've seen so far, the only one that really kind of struck me probably was Tamil Nadu. That's the state where I first kind of learned what Indian politics looks like, watching the massive fights between the DMK and the AIDMK, and driving through the streets of Chennai with the posters of the leaders glaring at each other. And now to see, an outside group really come in and potentially make a splash if some of the exit polls show and hold. So that's probably the one I think that's raised my eyebrows the most, just because it's the BJP has targeted new territories consistently, not always had a lot of luck. Tamil Nadu is one of those places. I didn't know the message. You think about Hindutva, you think about development. Well, they don't care about the first that much, and the second one they're doing all right, and yet still it seems to be resonating. So that's the one that I think probably struck me the most.
Not Orissa or West Bengal?
Well, we'll see. The numbers come out. Those have always been a little bit surprising sometimes. Not everybody walks out of the polling booth and offers up the most straightforward. So we'll take that one with a grain of salt.
Okay. But in terms of the reasons, you made a very important point. Do you think the Ram Temple, the Hindutva card really worked? Because by the end of the campaigning, we saw some very harsh words from both sides, particularly from the dispensation. Um, do you think that really worked in their favor? The kind of language, the kind of agenda that they took to the public? Ram Temple Hindutva card, or more of what the BJP had to offer and has to offer?
Yeah, again, as an outsider, that really is kind of highlighting one of the darkest moments in Indian history. But at the same time, I know for a lot of Indians, for a lot of Hindus, it is a proud thing to see, the temple get re-erected. So I know a lot of people I spoke to who are not devout BJP supporters, but it was a prideful moment, kind of seeing this the rebuilding of the temple and seeing it inaugurated. So I mean, as much as you can kind of see the voting data, as much as you can talk to people, it feels like it was a moment where they probably did generate some momentum, even among groups that ordinarily may not have been supportive of the BJP.
All right. And coming to elections in your part of the world, in your country, how is it looking, and will that change anything in terms of ties with India?
Well, it's looking fairly neck and neck. You look at polling across the nation, and it looks like President Biden and former President Trump are fairly close to each other. Although Trump has a slight edge in a number of key states that will make or break the election. So right now, it looks like former President Trump has a bit of an edge. With the guilty charges on this bribery scandal. Probably won't affect him that much, because I think, you think about the other many things that his supporters have managed to kind of ignore about his character and such. And I don't think this is one that's going to necessarily sink him in any kind of a dramatic way. So, but we still have enough time left. And if we are able to, to come to a resolution, a ceasefire in the Middle East, which has been very damaging for President Biden because his constituency is very split on this. There still are probably one or two more issues that are going to be deciders before the election comes up. So still plenty of time before we're going to know. But yeah, I mean, I think the relationship with India is going to be relatively stable. We've seen a Trump administration already, and even though you had probably a more intense fight on trade issues, you actually saw a deepening of security ties during that period and a pretty warm relationship between the leaders. So I suspect no matter what happens, this is one of the relatively few relationships globally that'll see relative stability, compared to what you might see with Mexico, with Europe, with Russia, where sometimes you've had pretty big turnarounds. So relative stability in my neck of the woods, irrespective of what happens in November in the United States.
All right. And finally, before I let you go, Rick, in terms of the cabinet, the fact that we're looking at most probably return of the Bharatiya Janata Party-led government, any expectations, any names that you think possibly could return?
Well, I mean, I think that probably fewer changes than you'd ordinarily expect, I would guess. Although I always caution my friends, there's only two people that know, and I'm not one of them. But when you think about what that might look like, Amit Shah seems like he's kind of a lock and home minister. I don't think that he's got the skill set to take over one of the other big Rasina ministries necessarily, which means Finance Minister Sitharaman should already have defense, which you want external affairs. I think that's a real strong suit for Jaishankar. So Rasina Ministries, you may see relative stability. The other one's a little bit up for grabs, but I think overall, you've got a great, I think, set of real technocrats that are running different departments now. I'm sure Piyush Goyal would love to move up and to get something different than just, trade and a few other things he's got right now. So there may be some adjustments, but it feels like the big ones on Rasina will remain relatively stable, which again is a pretty good signal because you're not going to see a big about face in terms of main policy priorities and the thrust areas.
Is a something majority of this kind that is expected, is that good and healthy for a democracy, or should there be an opposition that should find space or at least be able to find space?
Yeah, I mean, certainly opposition parties are important to make sure that voters have choices. In terms of national leadership, it doesn't feel partially because of the things the Modi government has done, and partially the fact that they've controlled the narrative so strongly that even areas they haven't been as strong in sometimes are portrayed as strengths, which kind of doubles down. And when you see pressure against independent voices, whether it's media or think tanks, things like that, having that healthy opposition and knowing that you may be one bad day away at the voting booths from being out of office is definitely a good thing. But if you talk about a government that can make big decisions on security, big investments on economic reforms, stronger majorities are a little bit better in that suit. So sort of depends on where you sit.
Right.
I think for a lot of things the United States has on the table, strong governments are helpful as long as the interests are aligned. And right now, it appears that we are, for the most part, with the Modi government.
What were the drawbacks? Where do you see the opposition in India lag behind, Rick, in your appreciation?
Well, you've seen, some of the younger dynamos that we've seen in the Congress Party get sidelined a bit. Some of them have left the party. So that's something that you'd like to see, as a party that has a relatively young leader, maybe trying to rally around, make that a major point. I guess at the end of the day, when I think of opposition too, for somebody who focuses a lot on state governments, a lot of these regional parties, and not many of them are really thinking beyond kind of the narrow interest of winning the next election and really trying to elevate themselves on national issues. And it'd be good to see that because you've got some really strong parties. Think of how long the BJD's been in office in Odisha, a relatively good
Absolutely.
run in Tamil Nadu under the DMK's current avatar. So you've got some really powerful parties regionally, and the United States doesn't engage. We don't know what the kind of global vision is. I think other voters in India don't really as well. So when I think opposition, it's not just Congress, of course. I think some of these regional parties just need to spend a little bit more time traveling, doing investor shows, bringing investors in. It's definitely good for, I think, helping India learn how they can manage to take some of that manufacturing slice away from China that the government definitely covets, because not all that is going to go to BJP states.
All right, Rick, it's only beginning of the day. We will try to connect with you as and when the results come in, and when there's clarity, maybe you'd have some more to add, inputs to add on India-US relations and what it could look like in the days to come. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.